Welcome to the Crazy Chicken People podcast. If you're crazy about chickens, then you're in the right place. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Crazy Chicken People podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I have some things to share about how I keep myself prepared for medical emergencies, and I've also got a pretty unbelievable story about a chicken named Mike. This is something I ran across when I was researching the History of Chickens episode, and just something I thought was kind of crazy enough to deserve a little bit more time than the few seconds I would have been able to give to it there. And it also goes along with first aid, which is kind of the topic for today's show. Over the weekend, I had an incident pop up with one of my chickens. It was a very minor injury, it turned out, really just a little scratch, no big deal. But I saw this when I was down in their run, and this particular run it's a little ways from the barn where we keep all our medical supplies. And one of my kids was down there, so I yelled over, "Grab me the medical bag from the barn." And he knew what I was talking about because he had seen me use it before. And because having that little medical go bag made it so easy to have somebody help me, I thought I would do a quick run through of what I keep in it and how those things might help you, as well as some other items that are really good just to have around the house or somewhere around your chicken coop when a health issue eventually does pop up. So for my little on-the-go bag, I ended up using this because there's been a few times that I had to provide some kind of medical treatment out away from the barn. Sometimes, a few 100 feet away from it. And it was kind of a pain to try to grab all the stuff that I needed, find something to put it into, take it out there, hope I didn't forget anything, all the while, wasting time when possibly I'm dealing with an emergency. So maybe you don't have to worry about that part of it. If your chickens are kept pretty close to where you're going to be able to keep all your supplies, I think just having them all together in one spot is probably good enough. Really just trying to avoid the situation where there is an emergency and you're already kind of worked up and frantic, especially if it's something bad, and looking for a pair of scissors or gauze is not what you want to be spending your time doing. I actually started using this one night when one of my goat bucks had gotten his scur, which is like a partial horn growth that they will sometimes get after being debudded. He got that thing torn off, and it was also on the same night that another one of our goats had gone into labor. So it was a little bit of a frantic scene. And, I see Nacho, and he looked so bad. He had all this blood running down his face. And of course, I'm chasing this guy around, trying to get the bleeding to stop. And as you can imagine, he's probably in a fair amount of pain. And he had no intentions of just calmly walking over to the barn to get treatment. So I grabbed this tool bag, dumped it out. I throw a bunch of my stuff in there that I figured I might need, and I take off after him. I ended up cornering him actually fairly close to the barn. There was a bit of blood, but was able to get it stopped and cleaned up. And fortunately, it wasn't as bad as it looked. I mean, it looked awful. I thought he was done. There was so much blood. But after that, I just kept all the medical stuff I'd used in that bag. I cleaned it up a little bit, but I wanted to have that there so that I could grab it and just go whenever there was a problem, and at least have the basics on me that I would need to treat an emergency. So I'll run through that kit and then what I also keep back at the barn. So in the bag, I keep a pack of latex gloves, try to keep things clean and sanitary for myself and the animal. A good pair of scissors, pretty straightforward why you're going to need that. And I also keep a good pair of wire cutters. There had been a couple of times that I've had to get an animal free from some fencing or some wire, and that can be difficult. It's kind of an intense deal. Probably not one that you'll run into with chickens so much, but you never know. You could probably leave that out. I like to have it. Then I keep some clean gauze and medical tape in a Ziploc bag. Always a good chance you're going to have to dress a wound. I keep a small bottle of Vetricin to clean and disinfect the wound. This is really good stuff. I also keep some iodine and some other products back at the barn for ongoing treatments or for certain applications. But the Vetricin I have found to be so good for all kinds of wounds. I use this stuff on Nacho's busted horn, in fact. Just really good stuff for cleaning and disinfecting some minor wounds. Another antiseptic spray that's used pretty commonly with animals is Blue Coat. And it does work well, but there is some downsides to it. And I would recommend reading up on it a bit just so you know everything that you're dealing with. Something I read about it in terms of use on chickens is that when used on a wound, it'll deter other chickens from pecking that spot. I don't know why that is exactly. Kind of think maybe because it's poisonous and they don't want to get that in their mouth. Also read that it was not safe to use on an animal that you intended on eating. So with that, I'm not totally sure you'd want to use it on a chicken that you were going to eat the eggs from either. So I think it's a good product and has its place. In fact, as a last resort, I used it on a quail that had pretty much its whole scalp just pecked off. I thought that bird was done, and I figured that the blue coat would at least give it a shot at disinfecting and covering up that wound until it had a chance to heal. And it did. It worked really well. The quail made it through, which I was very surprised. So good product. It works. I think there's a right time and place to use it. Just really want to be familiar with it first. Next item is a septic powder. I believe you can also use cornstarch in the same way, and that would be used to stop severe bleeding of a wound. This can be applied right away if you're dealing with a small cut or something that's bleeding pretty good, but you probably want to avoid using this in a deep wound where the product is really going to get down in there. Hopefully you don't end up with something like that with a chicken, because really you're talking about needing to apply a lot of pressure to stop the bleeding, and I just don't know how that would go on such a small bodied bird. A saline solution is really nice to have in your bag for when you need to flush out an eye or clean out a wound. You can get it in small bottles that are ready to use. They've got the little nozzle so you can really aim it right where it needs to go. And then another often overlooked item would be a good flashlight, or even better, a headlamp that has batteries in it. Inevitably, you're going to come to a point where you're going to be out there in the dark, and trying to use the light on your phone can be tricky while you're using your hands to treat an animal. The headlamp works really nice for that. Way easier than trying to hold a small flashlight in your mouth while you're also working to stop some bleeding. And I actually found a pretty good ready-to-go chicken first aid kit that was available. It's put out by My Favorite Chicken. I think it's on their website. I also saw it on Amazon. I think it was like $100 and had most of the things that I've just mentioned, and could be an easy way to get yourself set up. So I'll provide a couple links for that so you can at least take a look at what's in there. In fact, it's got a couple things that I haven't mentioned yet that you would also want to keep around. It comes with a packet of electrolytes, which are great to have on hand for the hot days, or for maybe a time where you've got a chicken that's not eating, but you need to make sure that it's getting something into it along with some water. There's tweezers and a syringe. Definitely want to have a syringe around. There's been some times I've had to use that to get medicine or even just water into a bird's mouth. In fact, it was a mixture of selenium and liquid B vitamins. Those are also really good things to have around in case you ever end up with a chicken that's got wry neck. The sooner you can get those things into it, the better chance you're going to have of helping that bird work through it. If you have ever had a chicken that was dealing with wry neck, you know how bad that is for them to go through. It's really sad to watch. The hen I did treat was able to pull through and get just about back to normal, but this is a condition with no real hard and fast cure. And whether or not they recover from it could really have a lot to do with what the cause of it was. If it's a nutritional deficiency or a bad ear infection, these things, they can be overcome. But this can also be brought on sometimes by brain damage or some damage to the nervous system where it's probably going to be a more difficult treatment. Okay, and the last couple things I would recommend keeping around is some Epsom salt. This can be used when you have a hen that's egg bound. Drawing a little bath with her for some Epsom salt, this can help relax her, and with some gentle massaging, you might be able to get those bound up eggs or egg, however many are in there, to come through. It's also really good for treating bumblefoot. I've not actually had to treat a chicken for this yet, but we did have some Pekin ducks for a while. And if you know much about them, they're very prone to bumblefoot. But I believe the treatment would be the same if caught early. Bumblefoot is basically a staph infection, typically caused by a small cut or scratch on the bottom of the foot that gets infected. And what you'll end up seeing is like a small bump on the bottom of their foot. You'll probably notice them limping or favoring that leg a little bit. It'll often have like a black scab at the end of it. You'll want to get some warm water with some Epsom salt mixed in there and soak the foot after a light cleaning of it for, 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 if you can get them to stay in there. And then after drying it, I would treat it with some of the Vetricin. and then just wrap and bandage that foot up. And then I kept her isolated in a dog kennel for, it was just about over a week, which is actually a pretty quick recovery, at least for ducks having bumblefoot. And actually the last thing is making sure that you do have some sort of a kennel, a small crate, whatever sort of safe, isolated space for when you do have an injured or sick chicken. You'll typically want to keep them away from the flock for a while. So that can be difficult to scramble and get put together sometimes. So if you at least kind of know what you're going to use and have it in a spot where it's going to be ready to go, that could be helpful. So having these items on hand is going to get you through most medical issues that you run into, at least for the short term, until you can figure out what exactly the problem is and if you need further assistance. There's, of course, a number of other products available. They seem to have a gel or a powder for just about any symptom a chicken might have. So you can really take it pretty far if you want to totally stock up a medicine cabinet. However, none of those items we talked about are going to help your chicken if they end up like Mike the Rooster. I mentioned having a pretty wild chicken story. And as far as I can tell, despite how unbelievable it sounds, this is totally true. On September 10th in 1945, farmer Lloyd Olson of Fruita, Colorado, was planning to eat dinner with his family and was sent out to the yard by his wife to bring back a chicken. Olson chose a 5.5-month-old Wyandotte chicken named Mike. And as he had done hundreds of times before, Lloyd raised his axe, swung down on the chopping block, and beheaded poor Mike. The axe removed most of Mike's head, but missed the jugular vein, leaving one ear and most of the brainstem still intact. Despite Olson's attempt to ready Mike for the stove, the chicken was still able to get up on a perch and walk away from the incident, although a little bit clumsily from what I hear. And from there, Mike continued on, trying to go on living his best chicken life. He tried to peck for food, he tried to crow, though with limited success. His crowing consisted more of a gurgling sound that his open throat made. When Mike refused to die, Olson decided that he needed to try and care for his now mostly beheaded chicken. He was feeding it a mixture of milk and water using an eyedropper and small grains of corn and little pieces of worms, all of which he fed directly into Mike's exposed esophagus. When Mike continued to live on, now days after the attempt to make him a dinner, Olson decided he needed to show this miracle to everyone in town. Mike's survival had people amazed and veterinarians baffled at how he could survive. At that time, it wasn't fully understood, but the part of the chicken's brain that controls basic motor functions needed to live, like breathing and a heartbeat, actually reside in the small part of the brainstem that was left behind and still getting oxygen to it. Mike's fame exploded with the story sweeping across the country. Lloyd decided he needed to cash in on this miracle chicken and took him on the road, touring sideshows alongside other strange attractions like the two-headed baby. People lined up for the experience at seeing this rare sight. At the height of his popularity, Lloyd and Mike were pulling in up to $4,500 a month while touring. That's the equivalent of about $60,000 today. This continued on until March of 1947, when one night in a Phoenix hotel room, Mike choked on a kernel of corn, ending the 1.5-year run of living without a head. Later, after examination, it was determined that a blood clot in Mike's artery, which otherwise could have killed the rooster, was actually what stopped him from bleeding out that evening on the block. The tiny amount of brain that was spared, likely because of a last-second flinch from Mike trying to avoid the axe's edge, was just enough to keep him living the best life that he could, despite not having a face. And even though Mike died, his legend continued to live on. He's a cultural institution in Fruita, where every third weekend in May, Mike the Headless Chicken is observed with a festival in his honor. It includes such events as the 5K Headless Chicken Run, Pin the Head on the Chicken, and a few others that are all played in his memory. So let Mike the Rooster be an inspiration to you anytime you're dealing with a sick or wounded chicken. If Mike could go on for 18 months without a face, a beak, or eyes, I know that you're going to be able to find a way to help your chicken get over whatever it's dealing with too. Hope you enjoyed that story. You guys all have a great weekend, and I will talk to you later.